Yeah, so we'll talk about what is integrated taxonomy and why we need it. So the way I have arranged this talk is we'll first talk about a little bit historical background about how taxonomy was perceived and changed with the advancement of DNA technology, and then we'll talk about why there is a need for integrated taxonomy, and then I'll give you a few examples of to understand how integrated taxonomy really helps. Um, so if you look at the traditional view of looking at taxonomists, you'll see that um, because of its descriptive nature, it has often been dismissed as a mere service to real or experimental sciences. So people rarely used to take, and I'll say that even now they take less or give less importance to taxonomists, and most of them actually disregard taxonomy as nothing more than stamp collection. In fact, taxonomists were regarded by many to have nothing more to contribute to modern biology than the pragmatic role of identifying species and keeping track of their names. However, as early as 1940s, it was realized that there is a need to look at taxonomy in a more holistic view. And in a very important work, the New Systematics, an edited volume by Huxley, Huxley gave the concept of biosystematics, and he suggested that it is time for us to look at species as a product of evolution. And he suggested that this system should use all known characters of an organism and evidence from different fields to classify organisms. So we should go away from traditional morphology based systematics and or taxonomy, and go more towards holistic view of systematics. Now, this concept was further developed by Henning in 1966, and he gave the concept of phylogenetic systematics, where he proposed the concept of holomorphology, and suggested that it should be a multidimensional framework where we look at morphology, we look at anatomy, we look at ethology, physiology, metamorphosis, polymorphism, and life history traits. And then we should look at the species and their evolution. So the important work or important contribution of this phylogenetic systematics was it placed taxonomy, nomenclature, and classification into an evolutionary classic model based framework. Now, even though these proposals were made and simultaneously other things were happening, for example, numerical taxonomy was being developed by Sokal and Ralph, and so many and others, and so many new things were happening. If you look at the trend in species descriptions, it was still mainly descriptive. So people were still going with the traditional view of morphologies, looking at morphologies and describing species as descriptive in a descriptive way. However, in early late 1990s, early 2000, technological development and new methods for delineating species suddenly sprang up. So there were advancements in molecular methods, molecular phylogeny, DNA barcoding, and this initiated alternative approach towards delineating species. So people started looking at alternate ways of delineating species, and they realized that if you look at genetic markers, genetic barcodes, you actually get a lot more interesting information in small amount of time. Um, Further, they also discovered morphologically cryptic species complexes, which question the reliance on morphospecies concept for species description. And this was a problem because, so what was happening was, because of the technological developments, people started working on genetic DNA barcodes and molecular phylogenetics, molecular systematics, and they gave over reliance on genetic barcodes for species delimitation. So they said, in fact, some proponents of DNA barcoding said that you should just forget about traditional taxonomy, and a DNA barcode can completely replace traditional taxonomy. Now, this was actually alarming, and people immediately started replying to this and responding to this. In 2005, two important papers were published which talked about perils of DNA barcoding. Um, uh, and both these papers suggested that you cannot just rely on DNA barcoding. Think about it. DNA barcoding is just around 650 bases of mitochondrial DNA, and you are trying to understand the evolution of an organism um, through last 3.7 billion years of life on Earth by just 650 base pairs. How is it possible? So these people cautioned taxonomists and other workers, and they said that no, you cannot just look at DNA barcoding as an alternative to taxonomy. It is not an alternative to taxonomy, and that is why there is a we should have more integrated taxonomy, and we should not rely on just DNA taxonomy alone. Okay, so what is integrative taxonomy? So the concept of integrated taxonomy is when you are delimiting the um, species or the units of life, you just don't look at morphology or DNA barcodes or molecular phylogeny alone, but you look at multiple different things. So you look at morphology, you look at anatomy, osteology, you look at development, you look at ecology, behavior of an organism, you look at biogeography, you look at population genetics, you look at multiple different things at the same time, and then you take a decision. So you don't take a decision of delimiting a species or a taxon solely based on one line of evidence, but you look at multiple evidences and then you take a decision. So that was the main proposal for integrated taxonomy. Okay, so if you want to integrate different types of evidences for taxonomic decision making, then how can you integrate it? Well, there are two different methods in which you can integrate it. So one method is you can take different evidences into the same analysis. So for example, I'll look at morphology of an organism, I'll code the morphology in some character states. I can look at the molecules, I can take multiple genetic markers, and I'll have genetic characters, and you combine all these data sets to create one final phylogeny which is based on both morphology and molecules. So you it is not just based on morphology or just molecule alone. You combine it, and you can provide a phylogenetic network or phylogenetic tree based on this combined data set. Now obviously you can also add behavior and other character states in it. The other approach to integrated taxonomy is you give different evidences. So you look at morphology, you give morphological evidence. You look at genetics, you give genetic evidence. You look at osteology, give anatomical evidence. You look at biogeography, give biogeographical evidence. So you give different evidences, and based on those evidences you take a final decision. So this kind of taxonomy, which is actually more common in integrated taxonomy literature, is also called iterative taxonomy. So you can either have a truly integrated taxonomy where you combine all evidences together to form a taxonomic decision, or you can take all different methods separately and then take a collective decision based on that. So how does integrated taxonomy help us? So it can actually help us in multiple different ways. So I'm just listing a few of them, and the way I'm going to go about it is I'll just list them, and then I'll go through each and every example and tell you how integrated taxonomy actually helps, giving one example of each. So integrated taxonomy can help by giving a more systematic approach to taxonomic description. So you're not just looking at nomenclature rules, you're not just giving a name, but you're also looking at the systematics of an organism. You're looking at its systematic status, its evolution, and so on and so forth. Um, you can also discover interesting evolutionary trends when you are doing integrated taxonomy. I'll give you a very interesting example for that. You can solve taxonomic ambiguities. You can resolve taxonomic dilemmas. You can discover cryptic speciation, identify species complexes, discover previously unknown ecological phenomena, and vigilance over bad description by using integrated taxonomy. So now what we'll do is instead of going through the technical details of it, let's actually take one example of each of this proposal, and let's see how integrated taxonomy helps us with this respect. So the first one is systematic approach to taxonomic description. Now I'll give you an example of one of our recent work which was published last year, and this is a very interesting family that we described called Enigma Channidi. and it's a snakehead fish. So the story starts in 2009 when 19 when we describe this new genus and species called Enigma channa golem. Now, a very interesting organism, which was first recorded from a subterranean channels. It was recorded from a well, and the moment we saw it, obviously we knew that it is something different. So a long, elongated eel-like organism. So it had some characters similar to snakehead fishes, but many characters which differentiated from the other known snakehead fishes of two different genera. One is Parachanna and the other one is Channa. Now, in the wells of Kerala, this particular organism was discovered, and by looking at its morphology and genetic structure, we proposed a new genus and new species, Enigma channa golem, to for this for identifying this organism. However, there was more to it. So when we started looking at the details of anatomy, the osteological structures, and other interesting anatomical features, we realized that it actually retains a lot of characters which are primitive to other channids. So Parachanna and Channa have certain derived traits which are lacking in this organism, and this organism has more ancestral traits which are found in related taxa like the Anamantidiformis or Anamantoidea and Nandoidea. So then what you do? Well, what you do is you start looking at the anatomy of these different organisms. So we looked at the osteological features. We looked at many different characters and created a character map. So we created a character map to understand how different organisms of Chenoidea, Anamantoidea, and Nandoidea are related to each other. And then we it clearly showed that this Enigma channa golem is quite distinct from the rest of the channids. In fact, it was so distinct that we realized that it should have its own recognition as a family, and that's how the Enigma channadi family was um, described. So you can again see that we are not just relying on one evidence. We are looking at multiple things. So we look at the anatomy of an organism. We do numerical taxonomy to understand its phylogenetic placement. You can obviously also look at genetic data. So we collected the whole mitochondrial genome and a few nuclear genes, and then we try to look at how the organism has evolved through time, and we realized that Enigma channa golem, which is ancestral to both Parachanna and Channa, might have evolved around 120 million years ago. So a typical Gondwana relic. So this analysis showed us that this is a Gondwana relic. The other analysis showed us that it retained some characters of ancestral forms different from Channidi. So we can actually say that this is a living fossil. So it's a very interesting example of a living fossil from a Gondwana time. So you can see that when you are looking at an integrated approach, so when you look at different evidences together, you can have a better understanding of a given taxon. Now I'll give you another very interesting about how integrated taxonomy can help us in discovering interesting evolutionary trends. Now this is an example of Indian glassy fish. So the interesting thing about this Indian glassy fish is they're transparent. I mean, they're completely transparent, and many of them are widely distributed in India and even in Southeast Asia. So they're quite widely distributed. In India, we have one very interesting genus called Chanda, and it is monotypic. So there is only one species, Chanda nama, and then we have other species under Parambasis. So we have Parambasis ranga, Vaikomai, Lala, Dei, Thomasi, and so on and so forth. And then we have others like some marine fishes as well in this group. Now, interestingly, for a long time, and even today, people still believe that Chanda is a quite distinct monotypic genus. So we were looking at the osteology of this organism. We looked at the osteology, and osteologically, you can actually see that Chanda nama has a completely different jaw structure than all other glass fishes. So it has a very protruding jaw. The dentition is different. The entire jaw structure is a very weird, different looking organism. So obviously, its placement as a different genus makes sense when you look at its morphology. But when you start looking at its genetic makeup, then you suddenly realize that it is actually nested within a larger clade of Parambasis. So genetically, so we use multiple genes, both nuclear and mitochondrial, and in a phylogeny, we found out that both in Bayesian as well as maximum likelihood phylogeny, Chandanama is actually nested within Parambasis. Now, this is a question that uh, so obviously Chanda is not a valid genus, so it is a part of Parambasis. But if it is a part of Parambasis, why does it have a completely different mouth structure, which has been used as a major taxonomic character to separate it from its congeners? The reason for this is because ecologically it is a completely different organism. So this is the only organism among the glass fishes which eats which is lepidophagus, or which eats scales of other fishes. Now this gives a very interesting clue. This means that Chandanama is actually a species in Parambasis. The only reason why it is different from Parambasis is because the jaw structure is protruding, which gives it ecological benefit of scraping scales of other fishes. So when you look at integrated taxonomy, you can give new information. So what we think is this is a case of divergent evolution where um the Chandanama, which is actually a part of Parambasis itself, showed this weird jaw structure, which was a ecological which was driven by its ecological niche, which is eating scales of other fishes. Now, obviously, it can also give you other interesting findings. For example, we also did molecular dating and found out that in this particular group, the transition from marine to freshwater systems happened around the KPG boundary. So, something around the KPG boundary, these organisms which were primarily marine came into freshwater forms and so on. So, now I'll not go into details of this particular phenomena, but what we have established is how integrated taxonomy can help you give new insights into evolution of different organisms. Um, integrated taxonomy can also help you solve ambiguities which has baffled taxonomists for lots of years. So I'll give you an example of a case which was a problem for more than 150 years. Now this is a case of a snakehead which is found in Kerala. So in Kerala, there is a species called Channa diplogama, and it was described in 1800s by Francis Drake. Now there is another species of Channa which is found in Southeast Asia, which is called as Channa micropeltus. Now Day himself found out that the Channa diplogama looks like Channa micropeltus, so he himself synonymized diplogama to micropeltus. But then there is a problem. The problem is, if you look at the distribution of diplogama, it is only restricted to southern India in state of Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and then you don't see this similar type of organism anywhere else in India. So obviously we have other channids, but we don't have Channa diplogama like organism which has gular scale, which is a very unique taxonomic character of this organism. And then you see a similar looking organism in Southeast Asia, which is Channa micropeltus. Now, this was a quite a big issue, and people wondered about this for a long time. That why you have such a weird disjunct distribution. So you have Channa micropeltus widely distributed in Southeast Asia. Then you don't have any similar looking organism in the rest of South Asia, and suddenly you have Channa diplogama in the southern India. Now, when Channa diplogama was synonymized to micropeltus, this micropeltus seems to had a disjunct distribution, and because of this weird distribution, when we approached in 2011, we approached IUCN to find the threat status of Channa diplogama, they said that no, it is Micropeltis. And if Micropeltis has a wider distribution in Southeast Asia and a smaller distribution in India, probably the Indian Micropeltis is just introduction of something from Southeast Asia. So if it is an introduced organism, we don't want to look at the threat status of an organism. Now, we believe that no, Diplogramma was a valid species. It is different from Micropeltis. So it is not Micropeltis, it is a valid species. And if it is a valid species, the populations are declining drastically and there is a need for conservation. But how do you show this? So how do you prove that Diplogramma is a valid species? So in this paper, which had 14 authors from both Southeast Asia and South Asia, we tried to look at morphology of Diplogramma, morphology of Micropeltis. We looked at the genetic markers. We looked at molecular dating, and we found out something interesting. So first thing we found out was morphologically, Micropeltis was quite distinct from Channa diplogramma. So there was Micropeltis and diplogramma were morphologically quite distinct from each other, even though they have been synonymized for some time. And when we looked at the molecular dating, we found out that these two organisms separated from each other around 12 million years ago. So 12 million years ago, come on, 12 million years ago, there were no humans. Humans are here on Earth hardly less than even 6 million, and as Homo sapiens, less than a million years ago. So obviously, Channa diplogramma cannot be an human or anthropogenic introduction of Micropeltis from Southeast Asia. So based on this paper, we actually suggested that this organism is valid. It cannot be an introduction. So diplogramma is valid organism, and it is highly restricted in distribution in Southeast Asia. Restricted in distribution in southern India, and there are so many threats to the organism. So it has to get a taxonomic status, threat status, which helps in the conservation of this species. So you can see that integrated taxonomy can also help you not only solve taxonomic paradox for which has stunned the taxonomists for a long time, but it also helps in conservation of an organism. There are other taxonomic dilemmas which can also be resolved by integrated taxonomy. So I gave you an example of, in glass fishes, I talked about divergent evolution, where organisms which are related to each other show completely different morphologies because of some ecological phenomena, because of which the organism, the morphological divergence happens more rapidly. Now, this is a completely different case. So here I'll talk about something called as a convergent evolution. Now, this story again starts in 1940s, where a species of a very weird looking fish was described from Periyar Tiger Reserve. So it was called as the peninsular trout because it actually looks like trout. So when Raj Tilak described this species from Periyar, he was quite baffled. He said that, oh, how come you have a trout in southern India? So somehow you have a trout-looking organism. Trouts are normally found in Himalayan regions. That's why they are called snow trouts. And you don't have trout-like organism anywhere else in India. So you don't have it in northern Western Ghats. You don't have it in the remaining peninsular India. You have trouts like schizophrenic fishes like Schizothorax and its congeners in the Himalayas. And then suddenly you have a very trout-looking organism in Periyar Tiger Reserve. Now, that was obviously a new genus and new species. Lepidopygops typhus was described from Periyar Tiger Reserve, and it was a dilemma because why do you have a trout in peninsular India? Now, for a long time, people believed that one reason could be range contraction. So, for example, probably trouts were found throughout the Indian subcontinent, and probably they went extinct everywhere else. Only in southern India, probably it survived and it diverged into different genus. But that theory actually doesn't make much sense because you don't find, you don't find any trout-looking organism anywhere else in India. when we started looking at this, so we did multi gene phylogeny. We looked at nuclear and mitochondrial genes of this organism, and we discovered something really amazing. The one thing we realized is the organism does look like a trout. So it has certain character states which are similar to the snow trouts which are found in Himalaya, but um, when you look at its genetic makeup, you actually see that it is genetically related to other fishes which are found in peninsular India itself, specifically in Periyar Tiger Reserve itself. So it has nothing to do with the Himalayan snow trouts. So what does it mean? It means that its superficial resemblance to snow trouts is either homoplasy, which is convergent evolution, where two distinctly related organisms might have similar morphologies just by chance alone. So this is a convergent evolution case, or character retention. So probably some ancestral character stayed in this particular taxon, and suddenly it showed those characters in the more recent times. But then what convergent evolution or what integrated taxonomy explained to us is this organism is not trout at all. It's a barb, and it is actually evolved from other species of barb which is found in Periyar Tiger Reserve. It has nothing to do with snow trouts, and calling it a trout or peninsular trout itself is a wrong case. um, Integrated taxonomy can also give you or give you more information about cryptic speciation, and this is a very interesting topic in itself, and this particular topic has gained a lot of importance in the recent times. um, so I'll give you one example of cryptic speciation that we discovered in another barb called previously known as Punkius denisoni, and now it is known as Sahyadria or Dockenshire. There is a slight gray area over there, but let's call it Sahyadria. So Sahyadria denisoni is found only in the Western Ghats of Kerala. Only one population in the Western Ghats of Karnataka, but it's only mainly found in the Western Ghats of Kerala, and it's found in all different river systems in Kerala. Um, Currently, it is known by, this genus is currently known by two species. One is Denisoni, the other one is Chalacodiensis, which has more restricted distribution in one of these localities. Denisoni is known to be present throughout this range. But when we started looking at each population separately, so we collected specimens from each river separately, we realized that although all the organisms looks very similar to each other, you don't see much morphological variation. Genetically they have diverged for a very long time, and there's a good ecological reason for that. See, if you look at the Kerala, you'll see that, so these are the Western Ghats mountain ranges, and the rivers in Kerala are all waste flowing rivers. So they originate in the Western Ghats and drain into the Arabian Sea. Now because they originate in the Western Ghats and drain into Arabian Sea, each river system actually is not connected to each other, because on one side you have the salt waters, the sea. On the other hand, you have the Western Ghats, the mountain ranges. So these organisms which live in the middle reaches actually cannot cross one river system and go to another river system, because they cannot tolerate the salt water, and the other side is the hills. um, as a result, all the populations are actually genetically isolated for a long time, and that is what we discovered. So we found out when we looked at this organism, when we looked at the morphological features, we found out that there are many morphological overlaps. However, genetically, when you look at this organism, you see that they have quite distinct genetic lineages. So distinct evolutionary lineages. Some of them have evolved for many million years, so more than 5 to 10 million years. They have diverged from each other. So sorry. So integrated taxonomy can actually help you to look at such patterns. Now obviously, if we only go with genetic data, we will say that okay, let's start describing all the species. But no, we looked at the integrated approach, and with integrated approach we know that it is not possible to delineate all the species based on their morphologies. So we cannot do that. Even though genetically they are quite distinct, they are not. They have not shown morphological differences. Even though we have some evidence that they might have some other ecological differences. For example, the growth patterns are different. So there is one paper where we showed that the growth patterns of these organisms are different. However, delineating them as separate species is not currently possible. So you'll see that even though in this particular case we did not describe so many different species from this lineage, we did realize that what we consider as one particular species is actually multiple cryptic species in this lineage. Um, Integrated taxonomy can also help you in identifying species complexes, and can obviously help you in designing your further work in taxonomy. Now, this is a recent paper that we published in Journal of Biogeography, where we looked at a very unique organism called Bhavania australis, which is found only in the southern Western Ghats of India. So it is found in Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu, in the Western Ghats of Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. And when we started looking at the different lineages of these organisms from different collection sites, from different river systems, we found out that it is not actually one species, but it is there is a proper genetic structuring in these lineages, and there are actually multiple species present in this particular taxon. So Bhavania australis is a species complex. So in this particular paper, where we try to establish that Bhavania australis is a species complex. Now, obviously, again, you will say that in the previous case, I said that they are all morphologically cryptic, so we could not describe them different species over there. Now, here I'm saying species complexes, even though again we have the same scenario. In this particular case, we found one interesting thing, and that is there are actually morphological variation among the organisms. So it is just our traditional taxonomy that we are considering them as one species, widely distributed species. But if you look at the morphological details, you can actually separate them out. In fact, during this work, we also resurrected one organism called Bhavania annandale, which was synonymized to australis for a long time. And we showed that not only it is genetically different from australis, but it is morphologically also different, and it has evolved for several million years. So this is a time tree where we actually show that these organisms have evolved for several millions of years from each other, and they have isolated for a long time. But how does so in this particular case, we are not only looking at, we are not only showing the species complex, we are also looking at how this species complex has evolved through time, and we also looked at how it has evolved through space. So we looked at the temporal scale of its evolution and the spatial scale of evolution. So we also looked at how it evolved in different river systems in the Western Ghats of India. So now again, I'll not go into details of this particular argument, but based on phylogeographical analysis using the DCA method, we looked at how ancestral river systems might have affected the dispersal of Bhavania australis in the different river systems of Western Ghats, and what could have led to, so what kind of things, for example, vicariance, dispersal events, speciation events, and even extinction events could have led to the current diversity of this group. So we found out that there are at least 8 different lineages of Bhavania australis, and we also found out that these 8 different lineages are result of multiple evolutionary phenomena, which includes speciation, vicariance, dispersal, and extinction events. So when you are looking at the holistic picture of organisms evolution, so we are not just doing stamp collection. So we are not just looking at organism and start describing them as a new species. You try to understand how they have evolved through time, through space. You try to understand the biogeographical patterns in their speciation events, and you look at the temporal scale of this evolution. So when you look at this holistic picture, you get a better understanding of the taxon and its taxonomy as well as classification. Um, integrated taxonomy can also give you very interesting insights into previously unknown or previously unknown ecological phenomena. So this is the last example I'll give you, where we had a very interesting case where we actually did a mistake. Okay, and that mistake was when we described a species called Pethia longicoda from northern parts of the Western Ghats. We said that so longicoda is found in Amboli in such and such rivers, and it does not have a very striking color pattern. So males, females do not have striking color pattern, and that's how we describe longicoda. One after a few months, we visited the type locality of longicoda again, and suddenly we found some organisms which had brightly red colored fins and different color pattern, and we were like, oh, probably this organism has some color pattern, and we did a mistake in our species description when we described longicoda, and we were quite upset. So we started looking at this color pattern. We started looking at what are the differences and all that, and then we suddenly realized something. We realized that when we go and collect these organisms from a shoal, so this is the same shoal. So in the same shoal, we find some organism which look like typical longicoda, which does not have much color differences, elongated organisms, and so on and so forth. But then we also find some organisms which are more deeper. They have more different color pattern, and so on and so forth. They look slightly different. We started looking at them in more detail, and then we suddenly realized that what we described as longicoda, two of the paratypes of that longicoda was not longicoda at all. That was a completely different species. And the only reason why we found out about it is because we started looking at its genetic makeup. We looked at the genetic makeup. We started looking at the osteological feature. We looked at the morphology, and we realized that morphologically, osteologically, genetically, there is a different species which lives along with longicoda in the same shoal. Now, this is a very interesting thing. Two species of the same genus are living together in the same shoal, and when we look at its genetics, we also realize that this also is a new species. So longicoda was a new species that we described in 2014. In 2018, we realized that there is another species which also is a different species which lives with longicoda, and we described it as Pethia sahita. Sahita in Sanskrit means together, so it lives together with longicoda. Now, if we would have gone only with typical traditional taxonomy, probably we have never discovered that in the same shoals of longicoda you have another species lurking over there. But because we use multiple approaches, we looked at multiple different things at the same time, we realized that there are actually two different species living in the same shoal. Now, the interesting thing about them is during the breeding season, longicoda does not get two different coloration. So uh, Sahita gets a completely different coloration, but longicoda does not. Probably that's how they are sexually separated from here. So there is a sexual dimorphism, or sexual separation, sexual isolation between these two organisms, because they can recognize their mates based on the color pattern. Now, as I said, we could have never realized this fact just by looking at traditional taxonomy. We could have said that this is just a variation, but by looking at the integrated approach, you can actually get a new information about the ecology. So we were quite amazed that in the same shoal, two different organisms exist. Now, integrated taxonomy can also help you in keeping a check on other description. Now, this species called Horabagarus melanosoma was described from India, from southern India, Kerala. And the reason why it was named as melanosoma is because it is darker in color. So when you look at Horabagarus brachysoma, which is quite common in Kerala, it is a golden color, golden to yellowish color organism. But melanosoma is more darker in color, and as a result, a paper was published in a predatory journal where the authors suggested that melanosoma is a valid species. based solely on morphology and based on the color differences. Now we were not convinced with this argument. We never thought that because there were not many morphological features that were different. Yes, the coloration was different, but we knew at the back of our heads that older specimens of Brachysoma becomes darker in color. So we thought that is it possible that Melanosoma is just an older Brachysoma? So then again, what you do is you collect Melanosoma from its type locality, you collect Brachysoma from the type locality and different localities in Kerala. You do the genetic analysis, you look at morphology, you look at osteology. So we did all these things, and then we realized that Melanosoma obviously is not a valid species. So it was a completely wrong species. Essentially, it was like saying that a grandfather is a different species from a grandmother. So and was wrongly integrated, and you can rectify them. Okay, now before I before I finish, I'll give you a cautionary note, and that is, many people think that creating genetic barcode itself is taxonomy. In fact, especially many newcomers or young taxonomists think that if I do genetic barcodes, that is enough for taxonomy. That is not the case. Genetic barcodes are for identification and not for taxonomy. There are first evidence that probably you are dealing with a species complex, or probably there is a new species, but that itself, just barcode, is not going to give you confirm taxonomy of an organism. Taxonomy is actually much more than just creating genetic barcodes. So be careful. Don't just rely on genetic barcodes for doing taxonomy of an organism. And you have to be also careful about misidentified genetic barcodes, because that can create a mess. Now, I'll just give you one example of how misidentified barcodes make a problem. So in a recent paper, we actually looked at barcodes of Western Ghats endemic balloturids, and we found out that all the barcodes available in GenBank are complete misidentifications, especially for endemic balloturids. So all the endemic balloturid barcodes available in GenBank are complete misidentification. In fact, the misidentification is at the level that in one case we found out that organism which was in GenBank as Ballitora brucei, sequences for Ballitora brucei, was actually sequences of Triplophysa kashmiriensis, and these two are different families. So so this one is Triplophysa, this is Ballitora. How can you identify a Nemacolid fish as a Ballitorid fish? That shows that you have no understanding of taxonomy whatsoever. So just looking at the barcode is not going to help you in taxonomy, and you have to go much more than that. And that is why we need integrated taxonomy. So you should look at morphologies as well as genetics when you are making a decision. In fact, I like this particular flowchart which is given in Riddle et al. And I'll not go to the entire flowchart, but the first question that the flowchart asks is, if you want to do some research on integrated taxonomy, the first question you ask is, are you a taxonomist? And if the answer to that is no, then the thing that you should do is you should go and please find one. Okay, so find one taxonomist, and then you start with your integrated taxonomic approach. There is also one more thing that I'll like to share, and that is the moment you'll start looking at integrated taxonomy, you will see that you will like to split some species into multiple species, because you realize that there are species complexes, or you might even try to combine certain species because you realize that what was described as two different species morphologically are actually the same ones. So people will start labeling you as lumpers and splitters. I believe that there is no such thing as lumpers and splitters. There is only good taxonomy. So you just follow good taxonomy, you do good taxonomy, you do good integrated taxonomy, and that should take care of your taxonomic issues. So I'll conclude. Uh, I'll conclude with this final note, and that is that integrated taxonomy is the future for fish taxonomy. Um, in case of fishes, we have realized that we are still suffering from taxonomic insufficiency. Um, the knowledge about freshwater fish diversity suffers from taxonomic insufficiency, mainly because not many people are actively working on this. Um, People are now taking interest in it, so they are doing barcoding and other things. However, if you do not do taxonomy properly, and if you just do barcoding, you are messing up with the taxonomy of an organism. So we see that in NCBI there is a lot of polluted. NCBI is highly polluted by wrong barcodes and other things. So we really need good taxonomists who are also integrated taxonomists if you want to see a better future for fish taxonomy. So what we need is good taxonomists. We need better taxonomic practices and collaborative efforts for efficient integration of various expertise in an integrated approach.